Good afternoon. My name is Tim Jeffcoat, and I'm today's host. Today, the webinar we're going to be presenting, and I've got a fantastic team of panelists that I'll introduce in just a moment, is really addressing the topic of the GDPR. And we're really going to be focusing on the opportunity around GDPR for managed service providers. So hopefully you're in the right place and this is what you're expecting, but we've got some fantastic discussion points that we're going to take you through, and really to help me take you through some of the principles of the GDPR and how it relates to managed service providers. I'm joined by a wonderful team of presenters. So with me in the room, sitting next to me, I have Jim Snedden and Jessica Simonson. Apologies, Jess. But Jess is from a large managed service provider in the UK called Complete IT. If you are based in the UK, you doubtless would have come across Complete. They don't need much introduction. But for those of you who are joining us from the European continent, Complete IT have been around for over a decade now.
25 years.
Yeah. And you've got a broad base of customers in a range of different industry verticals.
Yeah.
And Jim is sitting here with me, is a GDPR specialist and consults with a number of organizations about GDPR.
That's right, yep. Good afternoon, everyone.
And joining us remotely is Dan Sharp from another leading MSP in the UK and Ireland region, Mirus. And very similar to Complete IT, Mirus have been around for quite some time and have a broad base of customers for whom they provide managed services. So Dan, are you still there?
I am here, hello.
Wonderful. And finally, that leaves just myself. So as I mentioned, my name is Tim Jeffcoat, and I'm actually a techie. I work in the sales engineering team here at Datto. And Datto and Autotask have obviously recently combined over the last few months to make one of the largest vendors focusing purely on managed service providers. And really, our goal as a vendor is to provide state-of-the-art technology specifically for managed service providers. And I know that a number of you joining today's webinar are customers of Datto in one form or of another, either from our backup and business continuity side or from the Autotask, PSA, RMM, and other products from the legacy Autotask portfolio of the business. But I think that's probably enough introductions as to who we are. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we continue. In the GoToWebinar control panel, you should have an option to enter in questions. We're going to have a full Q&A towards the end of this webinar. So as we go through and present some of the content and discuss some of the topics we're going to be looking at today, please enter any questions you have via the chat box in the GoToWebinar panel. We can see those as they come in live, and we'll address all of those towards the end of the webinar. And also, this webinar is being recorded, and the replay of this webinar will be published towards the end of the day. It normally takes a few hours to actually process the video, but that will go live later this evening, and you should all get an email notification once that recording is processed if you wanted to revisit any of it or share it with any colleagues. So without further ado, I'm going to give us a quick scene setter and to really just give us the definition of the GDPR, because GDPR has been such a hot topic really over the last 12 to 18 months. A lot of organizations are really starting to think about how it's going to affect them. And to be honest, if they haven't already started thinking about it, it's probably getting a bit late, given that the GDPR is actually coming into effect in just over a month. But we thought just for a minute or two at the very beginning of this webinar, we would just set the scene with talking about what it is and who it applies to. So the General Data Protection Regulation, to give it its full name, has been in the works for several years now. And it's really designed to bring data protection laws into the 21st century. Legislation as it stands today has largely been written often 10, even 15, even 20 years ago. And because the use of technology and most importantly, the amount of data that people are sharing has changed and evolved so much over the last 2 decades, our laws simply haven't kept up. And that's really what the GDPR is designed to do, to give individuals more control over how organizations use their data, and to potentially introduce levies or penalties on organizations that fail to comply with some of the data protection rules and regulations that are part of the GDPR, and to really make sure that law is consistent across the EU. Here in the UK, obviously, a lot of attendees from today's webinar are based in the UK, even though the GDPR is obviously applicable to all EU companies. But in the UK, we've had the Data Protection Act in place since the late 90s, and the GDPR is going to essentially supersede that and to bring, as I mentioned, the UK and other countries all in line together, so we have the same approach to handling individuals' data. And I'm sure that Jim will come in and correct everything that I've just said further throughout this webinar, but this is the official brief that I've been given today. So who does this apply to? So the GDPR applies to broadly to two categories of organization: controllers and processors. Now, the purposes of this webinar isn't to educate you on what it is. We're going to be discussing how it relates to managed service providers. We thought it was worth just throwing up this definition at the beginning, and to identify the fact that a controller determines the purpose and means for processing personal data. And a processor is responsible for either storing or performing actions on that data on behalf of the controller. Now, if you are a managed service provider, you will be classed both as controllers and processors depending on the types of data you're working with. You will doubtless have your own customer record systems where you hold details of all of your customers. And under that context, you are a controller, and you will also be a data processor if, for instance, you have a data center and you're holding customer servers. You'll fall under both these camps. So the GDPR is very, very relevant to managed service providers and any organization that either holds data of their own or works with other organizations that hold data. So if you are a processor, the GDPR places specific legal obligations upon you. If you are a controller, there are slightly different requirements there, but there are still a number of obligations that are placed on controllers. Now, as I mentioned, we're not going to be delving too much into this. This webinar isn't designed to educate you as to what this is all about, but we thought it was just worth setting the scene with some of these basic definitions. Now, let me just set this one final piece of scene setting for this webinar. Really, our goal is to answer a lot of common questions that Datto as a vendor has been posed by managed service providers. And a lot of MSPs have asked us, how will GDPR affect my business? What should we do to prepare? How can we use Datto tools and technology to help us, but either get insights into the data that we're holding or to be compliant? What can we do to help our customers prepare? What is Datto as an MSP-centric vendor seeing other MSPs doing? What risks are posed to my business by GDPR? And what opportunities are there for me to grow my business and strengthen my relationship with my customers as a result of GDPR being implemented? So this is really what we are going to be discussing today to give you a clearer picture and some pointers and hints and tips as to how you can understand these various points and to apply them in your business. So at this point, I'm going to bring in my panelists. So bring in Jess, Dan, and Jim. And we've got 10 key points we're going to take you through that really will help to address these types of questions and really to set the scene for the context of GDPR for managed service providers. But before we actually dive into these 10 points, Jim, did I get anything wrong? Is that largely accurate?
Largely, it was accurate.
Okay, good.
One thing I would just clarify is the GDPR is a global regulation. It applies to any organization globally who processes the personal data of EU subjects, residents, or citizens. So if it was a US company who was processing personal data of somebody from France, for instance, they should comply with GDPR. If it's processing the personal data of somebody outside of the EU, then GDPR doesn't apply.
Yep, very valid point there. And it's not just the US. I think obviously the US is a key consideration here because there are so many big tech companies and big services that a lot of people use that are based in the US, but it could be China, it could be Australia, anywhere that is processing the data of EU citizens has to comply with this. Absolutely. So yeah, thank you for clarifying that. We are going to go and talk about our very first discussion point, and that is really all about trust and commitment. So trust and commitment really has been identified as one of the key factors that a managed service provider builds their business around. Managed service providers position themselves as IT experts, as a single point to go to for their customers when it comes to all things tech. And now all things tech also includes GDPR. So, Jess, I know that at Complete, you've got a number of activities that you've been going through to really position Complete IT within this trust and commitment to your customers. You could tell me a bit about that and the cyber essentials and some of the programs you put in place?
Yeah, absolutely. So for us, our starting point was always going to be educating our teams. So from the help desk to the technical consultants, the account managers, to enable them with the tools to talk to their clients about GDPR and what they should be doing. We actually partnered with Jim a while ago now and have run a number of workshops for us internally for our teams, and that's an ongoing process, and workshops and seminars and webinars for our clients as well, free educational sessions and also paid for workshops where they go away with gap analysis and they're personalised to their businesses. It just builds the trust with them and they know they can come to us.
Well, there were three main things I took from what you just said. That you've, Complete IT as an organisation has done some of their own consulting to understand how they have to comply, and then you've put in training for your own staff, and then programs and services for your customers, both some free and some paid for, that has obviously helped to grow your business as an MSP.
Yeah.
Dan, how does that relate to what Myris have been doing? Do you recognise those three things? Myris's own internal compliance, training your own staff, and then looking at services for your customers.
Exactly, very similar. So we have a business quality manager that's responsible for our all of our ISO standards and investors and people, and so he's been our headlong GDPR internal champion, so educating people around the business. And from a customer perspective, I think there's lots of confusion out in the world, as every post you see on LinkedIn or every email they get into your email box now is a solution that solves GDPR and makes you GDPR compliant. And that's driving a lot of questions from customers. So we very much took the education approach the same as Complete. So we run seminars called Knowledge Academies. So we've done 5 or 6 Knowledge Academies now. We've had kind of 50, 60 people attend those each time, where we've worked alongside a local data protection lawyer we come from the perspective of not trying to sell something to somebody. It's very much because it's not just an IT solution. It's about processes and their internal procedures as well. So it's helping to educate that then hopefully drives forward and opens some opportunities where actually they might say, we actually need to do this ourselves, as well as us saying, you need to do this. So it's trying to educate the customer to alleviate this kind of, well, what is GDPR and what should I be doing and how do I fix it and how do I make myself compliant? It's not a simple question to answer, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I think really that is one of the key roles of an MSP, is to be that trusted advisor to their customers. And that could be a trusted advisor for what server to buy or what CRM system to deploy or what phone system to use. But now, that's got to be how do I remain compliant given that I'm using technology to store people's data. Now, Jim, I know you come from a techie background yourself, and now you've obviously kind of have gained skills in this area. What do you see as the biggest change for service providers when it comes to how they position themselves as a trusted advisor?
Well, I think on the question of trust, it's key if you're a service provider to have the trust of your customers. It's a different situation than being a vendor where it's a sell a piece of kit or software and off you go till renewal time. There's an ongoing relationship and a commitment to those customers. And I've been actually really heartened. I've been delivering a lot of consultancy and training via managed service providers to their customers if they haven't had the in-house skills. But the real appetite to provide that knowledge to their customers without the hard sell, because they realise it's going to benefit themselves, it's going to benefit their customers, but also inevitably, because of that trust building, opportunities are going to arise. It's just a fact.
Yeah, and I think yeah. Go ahead, Dan.
I was just going to say, I think it, in some respects, takes you into a different part of the business that naturally you might not have been involved in. You would get involved in a different conversation, and you get more involved in that business because it stretches beyond the standard kind of help desk, and you need a new server, or you should be migrating to Office 365. It kind of opened up some different avenues for you to talk to different people within those businesses.
Absolutely.
And a common theme that I've seen is that some MSPs and a lot of MSPs aren't necessarily going to be the right person to actually consult or implement with their customer, but they can be that trusted advisor to say, okay, well, here's who you need to talk to, or here's where you need to go in order for you to make the changes you need to get into compliance.
Yeah, and we spoke to a number of different specialists before deciding to partner with Jim, and sort of played that middleman, deciding on who was the best person for our clients to speak to deliver the training for them.
Absolutely. I mean, it makes sense, doesn't it? You're in that trusted position, so you're going to do the legwork on behalf of your customers. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. I've heard GDPR compared by quite a few people to something like the Millennium Bug. A big event that's very time sensitive, that's going to have big repercussions throughout the industry. Now, as it panned out, the Millennium Bug actually doesn't seem to be all that it was hyped up to be. It obviously affected some systems, and obviously one example is airlines. A lot of airline systems that kind of were severely disrupted by their clocks not being able to handle the year 2000. But nevertheless, it's a comparison point because we have this big event that affects a lot of organizations that is really highly related to technology. And that actually brings me on to our second discussion point, and that's all around state-of-the-art tech. The Millennium Bug could be solved by updating your IT systems that could handle the year 2000. And to a certain extent, GDPR also has a big tech element in helping organizations remain compliant, in understanding what data they have, where it's being held, how long it's being held for, and then processing things like the right to be forgotten. So, Jim, I'm actually going to come to you first here. I mean, what are the common challenges from an IT perspective for GDPR?
So it's probably a good idea to set my stall out initially. GDPR, the huge majority of it, probably 75% of it, 75% is around training, processes, procedures, policies, and so on. The IT part plays a big part of it and a very important part, but you can't just throw everything over the wall to your IT provider because, with the greatest of respect, they don't know the inner workings of how the HR or payroll department work and how their processes work. They do the IT parts. So what it does do is it opens up more opportunities for services, quite apart from the technical pieces where you can go in and do health checks and make sure the configuration of firewalls, servers, routers, whatever, is all up to speed. They're patched up to date. They're up to the latest version. They've got encryption switched on if it's not already switched on, and all of this sort of thing. They can go in and provide services, which obviously can be paid for or not, as the case may be. However, there's also the ability to provide the documentation and all of this sort of thing as well. So the technical piece is very, very important. I think I always, in my training, I liken the technical piece to the technical side does what human beings find very difficult to do. So, for instance, management of secure passwords. You can use technology to deal with that. Access control, two-factor authentication, all of this sort of thing. Difficult to do manually, so you rely on machines to do it. Encryption, very difficult to do manually. You rely on machines to do it. So all of these sorts of security measures are great for machines to do. They do the heavy lifting very quickly, and it takes the onus off of the human factor.
This is something we've seen as a vendor. MSPs have come to us and said, how will your products help me make my customers GDPR compliant? And that's really a misnomer, just as you described. There is no black box that an MSP can sell their customer to make them compliant. So it really is a combination of a number of things, particularly around, I'd say, the processes and so on.
It is, and as I say, it's an opportunity for managed service providers to actually expand on some of the services they can provide.
Yeah, like Jim said, for us, it's all about looking at our clients' security, what they're doing, that multi-layered approach, and again, educating them in what they should be doing to protect their data. And that's absolutely the angle we're coming from. We've just launched a new solution, Complete Cybersecurity, and that's what we're talking to our clients about rather than the data management side of things.
I think a good example is a recruitment agency. We can provide them the foundation for everything they need to do to make sure that their data is backed up, it's secure, their systems are protected, but we don't control what their permission is, or their authority to keep a person's CV for how long within their database. We can provide all the IT systems and the security and the wraparound to make sure what they've got is safe and they're protected as a business, but they've got to work on their own processes and their permissions from their candidates. How long can they keep their data? What's their management of that system to make sure that they're adhering to the rules that they say they're going to stick to, if that makes sense? So we can point them in the right areas and that kind of thing, but that's a business process of theirs. We can help them put the right foundations from an IT perspective in place, but we can't necessarily help them with that part.
And that actually brings me nicely on to our third discussion point about transparency. Now, the GDPR is really designed to help make a lot of businesses around the world be a bit more consistent, a bit more transparent about what they're doing with customers' data. But transparency also applies directly to service providers. And there's a number of elements to this. It's, as a service provider, it's being clear with your customer what you can actually do to help them and what you can't do to help them, and really being that, come back to that first point we made about that trusted advisor of where to go to get the information that you need. And Jim, you've made comments in the past about how GDPR is all about the lawful, fair, and transparent processing of data. How does an MSP need to be transparent with their customers?
I hesitate to use this hot topic, but the whole Facebook Cambridge Analytica is a perfect example of where transparency wasn't in place. And when these sort of things are raised in the media and in the news, suddenly everybody starts to question, well, hang on, I've got other people doing things with my data. That could be managed service providers, social media, it could be marketing tools. Suddenly it puts a bit of suspicion and people start to take a step back. And I think the way to prevent that from happening is being very clear and transparent up front. This is who we are. This is what we're doing with your data. This is why we're doing it. This is who we're potentially sharing it with to do another process or sub-process, and just letting them know. And in fact, it is one of the principles of GDPR. It's to be lawful, fair, and transparent in the processing of personal data. And transparency, as we know, builds that trust, going back to the earlier point.
So I've got a slight sidetrack question for you here, Jim, that I'm sure that Dan and Jess might want to comment on as well. But also, one of the elements of the GDPR is the role of the data protection officer. And there's a number of different ways that can be implemented, and obviously the size of the organisation also determines what they have to do in terms of that role of the DPO with the acronym. And what I've seen some MSPs providing is either having their own, essentially hiring their own lawyers and solicitors who can fulfill that role for their customers, or kind of brokering that between their customers and a local solicitor firm that the customer might already have a relationship with to fill that role of the data protection officer. How does that make a difference to MSPs? Is that something they should be worrying about?
What tends to happen, and having these conversations with Jess and Complete IT and many other MSPs that I work with, is they're the first port of call. The customers will come to them and go, we've heard about this GDPR thing, what are you going to do about it? And of course, they're not in that business, they're not in the compliance business. So the smart ones will go out and source somebody that they trust on behalf of their customers, and that works quite well. And that's the same with the data protection officer. The data protection officer is required only in 3 types of organisation. That's public sector, so councils, police forces, schools, and hospitals, and so on. It's for organisations that do large-scale monitoring of personal data. So your Nectar cards, Amazon, Tesco Club cards, Oyster card, people who do large-scale CCTV monitoring, but also organisations that do large-scale processing of what they call special categories of data, and that's health information, religious beliefs, philosophical beliefs, ethnicity, and so on. If they don't come within that criteria, they don't need a data protection officer. However, if any of the people on the calls organisations do need a data protection officer, it's probably best to get them to outsource it unless they're a very large organisation, because it's quite expensive to hire one, and their role is ring-fenced, and they can't have a conflict of duty, so they can't do many other roles within the organisation. So it's a bit of a minefield.
Yeah. And this is why I want to talk about this under the transparency element, is that some customers are going to think, oh, my service provider can sort me out for GDPR, whereas in reality, depending on the type of organization they are, it's really going to depend on the specifics of that specific situation.
Sure.
So let's move on to point 4, motivation. Now, service providers and managed service providers, their key motivation is not only to assist their customers, but they have to be a profitable business as well. They've got employee salaries to pay. They have to be a profitable business, and being motivated under the context of GDPR again can have a number of different interpretations and meanings. But really, what we wanted to talk about under this particular point was to really look at, again, the opportunity for managed service providers, because there is clear motivation for an actual business to remain compliant, because there are significant fines for not talking about a data breach and that kind of thing. So, MSP's customers are motivated to take action around this. So, how does that then relate to MSPs? Now, I'm actually going to come to Dan first on this one, because obviously Myrus, as you've already described, have put in place workshops, training sessions, seminars, and that kind of thing. How's the attendance been at those? Have customers have they been biting your hand off when you've been talking about GDPR?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, we started off probably a year ago now. So we had a conversation with a local law firm that have a kind of data protection specialist, and we kind of came up with the idea of starting this education program. And every event's basically been sold out all the way through. So it's been great for us to get new faces in the door, and to get people into our business and have a look around. And it's kind of said, well, let's do another one and another one and another one, because every single time we've got really strong attendance, more than anything we've ever done before, to be perfectly honest. So in some respects, that's where GDPR has been great, because it allowed us to get new people into our offices and have a look around and come and see us. But I think our motivation isn't, yes, we want to sell people solutions, but if our motivation is to do the right job for the customer, and if we're doing the right job for the customer, then that should result in us selling extra solutions. It's not a case of pushing all these solutions on somebody to say, oh, you need to buy this, you need to buy this. If it's a joint decision of it's the right thing for their business to do, then it's a win-win situation for both. I know it's cheesy, but if we're adding value to their business by saying this is the right solution to you and it gives you this, and yes, we make some money out of the back of it, but we all benefit. So that's the approach we've tried to take. It's not just about selling solutions we want to make the most money out of. It's doing the right thing for the individual customer.
Yeah, spot on. Jess,
yeah, absolutely. That's the same approach we would take. Dan, are your workshops or seminars, are they paid for ones, or are they purely educational, just out of interest?
Yeah, all free. We've had about 60 people in each time, mixture kind of 50% customers, 50% people we don't know. And obviously, just having people in your office and, get to meet some of the different people, it gives you the opportunity to introduce yourselves to other people that you might not have had the opportunity before. So no, it's not charged. We just use it as a way to get people into our office and get to say hello to us.
Yeah, so we've done a mixture. We've done the free educational seminars and a few of the workshops alongside Jim, which are paid for. So each client that comes along has a paid for slot and then gets their individual consultancy, I guess, a day's consultancy, alongside 5 or 6 other clients. So that obviously is great for us, but it is educating and helping our clients to go away with a really clear understanding of what their particular organisation needs to do going forwards. But again, the motivation for us is just that relationship and the trust of our clients that we're helping them to help their organisation and educate everyone in their organisation, rather than just the top people that they think need to be involved. It's not. It's absolutely everyone that needs to be educated on GDPR and what they need to do.
Yeah, precisely. So let's move on to our 5th talking point then, about using data to your advantage. Now, something you've said or you've commented on in the past, Jim, is really that a a service provider is in quite a unique position because they do understand, or at least in theory, they understand their customer's business pretty well. They understand some of their requirements from an IT perspective. They understand the size and the nature of that organization. And that can put a service provider in a very favorable position for helping their customer. So what further advice would you give to an MSP about using data they already have to their advantage?
Yeah, so I already touched on how data can be used to disadvantage the customer, or in a way that the customer wouldn't expect. But by the same token, if you know your customers, you've got a relationship with them, you manage services, because you're experts in what you do, you know about the next big thing in Office 365, for instance, and your customer doesn't necessarily have their finger on the pulse. But because you know the challenges your customer faces and so on, you may be able to introduce in new technologies, and it might be that it's just an update or an additional service or functionality, but it just means you're giving that extra value add because you know your customer, because you know how they do business, because you're looking after their systems. It's being engaged with their business, having a proper relationship and properly looking out. I mean, I know it's difficult to do that for every single customer all of the time, but you do find that there's commonalities where there is a benefit to all of your customer base, and you're doing that on their behalf.
Yeah, definitely. And obviously, as an MSP business, you're going to have to make sure that you remain compliant. So if you have databases that contain personal identifiable information, you're going to have to make sure that you cleanse your own data so that you can remain compliant as a business yourself. So the process of you as an MSP getting yourself ready for GDPR then gives you a very first reference point. You can say to your customers, well, look, here's how we remain compliant, and here's how we can potentially advise you when you look to come into compliance. So use yourself as your first reference when it comes to helping your customers.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, I think as an example where we're updating every single customer contract to make sure that's GDPR compliant, it's kind of then saying, oh, actually you're doing this. We need to think about this as well. It's because we're taking actions that are fairly visible. I think that then drives them to think, actually, we do need to do something about this because they're seeing things from us and action from us rather than just talk.
Yep, precisely. So our sixth talking point then, chance to re-engineer. Now, once your customers do start the process, or if they should already have started it months ago in theory, but once that process does begin where they look at their internal systems, their internal processes, the forms they use to capture information that they need for their business, they might then find certain elements where, okay, well, HR need to change this part about their workflow, or this particular part of our business needs to change something in order to remain in compliance. And some businesses and organizations are actually going to use this as an opportunity to maybe redesign larger elements of their business, either for cost savings, for better efficiency, or to future-proof themselves for further down the line. So this is a chance for your customers to maybe re-engineer themselves a little bit. And this presents a big opportunity for MSPs. If you have a customer that's using a database system that's 5 years old, and they're going to be making some significant changes to either cleanse their data or to help themselves with GDPR compliance, this might then require a new database system, a new servers, a new storage. And that's a big opportunity for an MSP to come and do their more traditional business transactions under the banner of GDPR. So a chance for your customers to re-engineer, a chance for you to expand the services you provide. And finally, it's also a chance for you as an MSP to maybe reinvent yourself slightly. As you start to position these services, it potentially open up new lines of business to you as a company and various other things. So, I've given us a quick opening statement there. I mean, Jess and Dan, how do you view this as an opportunity? Is this something you've seen your customers asking you about?
Yeah, we've seen a lot of our clients sort of asking about databases and what we recommend they should be using, because like you say, they're using databases from 5, 10, 15 years ago that are very clunky. They don't know what sits in there. And for us, it's about talking to them about their data and looking at what data they have, what data can they get rid of. There's historical data they will never need again. They can completely wipe it, start again from fresh, basically,
Yeah.
which is the case with many of our clients.
And Dan, is that something that you've seen customers asking you about? Is this something that they can and should be doing to re-engineer their systems?
Absolutely. I think, like Jeff said, it's HR records as an example, how long they keep things for, and a larger business that has a reasonable turnover of staff that's been in existence for 10 years has a decent amount of personal data of people that are no longer relevant to them. Having that tidy up, and things like marketing databases is a classic example where people generally have all sorts of data. They don't know where it's come from and how to control that data.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah, so absolutely, it's whether organisations like it or not, I think this is going to be a catalyst for business transformation. And it will be for the better, because we see there's personal data, and indeed, if you're doing this anyway, it can apply to any data, but under GDPR, personal data could be sat in a multitude of different places. It could be on USB thumb drives, it could be on removable media, it could be on servers, shares, laptops, tablets,
a cloud
whatever.
system.
It could be anywhere. And what you really want to be doing going forwards is looking to sort of centralize that, where if you did have, say, the right to be forgotten requested, or a subject access request, instead of having to go to 12 different disparate systems and trying to find out and still not really knowing if you've done it properly, if you've streamlined your IT systems, if you've got databases that help you quickly find things, it is going to be that transformation. And there's, as I say, a catalyst from this regulation. However, going forward, it will streamline the business anyway. And I think there's a great opportunity to go in and help MSP's clients.
Yeah, definitely. Now, I've noticed my slide deck has already advanced to point 7, so you've had a sneak preview for the last couple of minutes of what we're going to talk about next, and that's really about leveling the playing field. And what we're referring to here is the fact that it doesn't really matter what size of service provider you are. You could be a 3-man IT service provider with 10 customers, focusing on a specific region, a specific town somewhere, or you could be a multinational service provider with operations in multiple countries and thousands of employees. Regardless of the type of service provider you are, you have to be prepared to address GDPR with your customers, either to advise them or to provide services or products to help them. And that really does level the playing field, regardless of the size or nature of service provider that you are. You still have the ability to be that trusted advisor to your customers. Now, obviously, Jess and Dan from Myris and Complete, you're both large service providers. And so you have a lot of customers who are looking to you for guidance. But Jim, I mean, what's the typical size of service provider who's coming to you for assistance?
They're typically small to medium size service providers. Complete IT are probably the largest I work with. But basically, it's people who don't have the skills in-house who are using me. However, some of them do have some skills, and they do the bits they can do, and some use me until they get skilled up. What I would say is, when we talk about a level playing field, I'm a consultant and trainer, so in my own way, I'm a service provider, and I'm very small. I've only got a couple of associates I work with, and it's leveled the playing field for me, because with Complete IT as a perfect example, before they met me, funnily enough, at DatoCon, they had gone out to look after their own GDPR compliance. They'd had a number of tenders, which were, quite frankly, ridiculous in what they costed. They had a chat with me at DatoCon, and I just, gave a very basic overview of, this is where you need to do what you need to do to get started. Take it from there, and then bring me back in as and when you need me at a fraction of the price. So if you're straight, upfront, honest, and open, and you sort of do what needs to be done rather than trying to oversell, it really does help you to get the business. And that's why I think anybody who's not doing the hard sell, it's going to make it a level playing field.
Yeah, it's a brilliant I must say analogy there, but that wasn't an analogy. That was a real experience, an example. So and I think that principle you just described is very applicable to every MSP out there, regardless of their size. It does level the playing field, which is a great opportunity for service providers, regardless of which market you play in or kind of the nature of provider that you are. Now, that may not be good news to some service providers, but I think it really is an opportunity for the MSP. So 8 out of our 10 talking points is about time to invest. And again, this has a number of different elements to it. And it also relates a little bit to some of the previous points we've talked about. So re-engineering and using your data to get insights. But we know that a lot of organizations are going to realize that becoming compliant with GDPR is going to cost them some money, whether that's for consultancy services, implementation services, and so on. Customers are anticipating the need to invest, and that immediately presents an opportunity for MSPs. And I think that's probably something that both Jess and Dan can probably relate to, and that you've seen this demand from customers.
Yes, absolutely. So like Jim said, us ourselves went out to tender. I think we had spoke to 4 or 5 different consultants, and they were absolutely astronomical. So for us to sort of step back and go, actually, no, that's ridiculous. There's no way we should be paying that amount. For our clients that are a lot smaller than us, getting quotes like we did, that's just not going to work. And a lot of them will have just brushed over it and thought, well, I'm not going to do anything about it. So that's when we come in and sort of start conversations with Jim and ourselves, their account manager, and talk about what they need to do, because it may be something tiny that they need to change because their data is all secure, or it may be a lot bigger. So it's just how we can help them to look at the best cost saving going forwards.
Yeah, thank you, Jess. So our point 9 of 10 is about brand exposure. Service providers build their reputations on their skills and their expertise. That's how you build a successful service provider business. You show your customers that you have the required skills to help them solve their problems. And brand exposure in building either a practice around GDPR, or at least having showing your customers confidence that you as a service provider are able to help them with this really is vital. So showing your customers, your audience, that you are yourself complying with GDPR is a great way of building that brand exposure. I mean, Dan, obviously, Myris have got presence up and down the country, but obviously you're based in the Midlands and you have a lot of customers in that area as well. Have you seen new customers that you've not done business with coming to you to talk about GDPR?
Yeah, like I said, I think because we focused on the education side and the free events, we've seen it gives us the ability to publicize those events. But when people have attended and given us really strong feedback on LinkedIn and Twitter and that kind of stuff, again, it helps us enhance our reputation rather than just we're in it for the money. It's more about education and trying to be a partner to that organisation rather than what can we sell you next, which, yes, we do want to sell people things, but it's selling people the right solutions at the right time that are right for their business. So I think it's definitely helped us, and we've very much taken the approach that, look, from a technical perspective, a really great first start is doing Cyber Essentials. Mm-hmm. And it gives that business the ability to push the fact that they're doing something about it themselves. Obviously, everybody likes a badge. They get a badge for Cyber Essentials to say, look, I am doing something about it. And any business that obviously deals with government or public sector type organisations, I think it's increasingly becoming the case that they have to achieve the minimum of Cyber Essentials, or in some cases Cyber Essentials Plus. So we've put ourselves in a place where we can do those audits to take people through so that they can achieve certification through us, so that, again, the ability to demonstrate they're doing something to their customers, their suppliers, their audience as well.
So just a bit of explanation there. Jim, can you just 2-sentence overview of what Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus are for anybody who hasn't come across them yet?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't deliver Cyber Essentials Plus.
But what is it?
Basically, it's a great way to explain it. Everybody likes a badge, including the supervisory authorities. There is no official GDPR accreditation or certification out there, but it does state within the regulation that if there are existing frameworks or compliance accreditations that have been gained, such as Cyber Essentials Plus, or ISO 27001, they will look on them very favourably. And basically what they do is they show, so Cyber Essentials is, as the name would imply, it shows that you've got the essentials of cybersecurity, information security in place. You've got a good, strong password policy. You have got, you update the patches on your systems regularly. You have up-to-date and decent antivirus that can cope with today's threats, and much more. And Cyber Essentials Plus is Cyber Essentials but on steroids. It's a bit more in depth. And basically you take on what suits your type of organisation. But I think I would say very strongly that at least the Cyber Essentials is something that many organisations should be looking at.
Yeah, definitely. And that actually takes us nicely into our last talking about the future. I mean, in today's world where we live in a digital economy, where every business out there, whether you're a small double glazing organization or a big insurance firm, all of us have data about our customers in one form or another. And I think that taking a closer look at the way that data is handled and processed, the auxiliary systems around that really is the future of all of our lives, both our personal lives and our professional lives. So I think that the GDPR has probably been quite some time in the making, and obviously the 25th of May is the date which organizations have to be compliant with. I'm not sure I'm using the right phrase there, but the 25th of May is the due date for all of this, and I think this is really going to affect the way that a lot of businesses and organizations operate in the future. So I think this is quite a landmark, really, in the day in this modern era of the digital economy. So no further questions there. That was just kind of a closing statement for those 10 points. Now, I do have a quick recap of those 10 points. So there's the 10 things we've just discussed. So trust and commitment, using technology, being transparent, being motivated, using data to your advantage, re-engineering, leveling the playing field, investing in transformation, brand exposure, and finally, the future. So, I mean, hopefully those 10 points have given you food for thought, given you some pointers as things you can do as an MSP to either really seize the opportunity, whether it's through new services, whether it's through partnering with other organizations, whether it's through bringing in external consultants like Jim. There is so many things you can do if you haven't already started to really maximize the opportunity of GDPR. So we have a few minutes for questions, and I have seen there's quite a few questions that have come in via the GoToWebinar panel. So I'm going to go through some of these questions and direct them to my panelists as needed. So our first question is from Katie. Are there industries in particular that are most in need of GDPR guidance or consultation? Now, we did discuss this briefly. Actually, I think it was Jim who did give us an outline of some of the key organizations that might need a data protection officer as an example. So, are there any particular industries that this is applicable to?
If I can go first,
yeah,
it's across the board. It's any organisation whatsoever that deals with personal data of EU citizens or subjects. Now, obviously, certain types of organisation are holding more sensitive personal data, and they probably need to look at things a bit closer and ensure that they really are moving towards compliance. People with health information or information around criminal activities and this sort of thing, some really sensitive information, they need to be looking at it. But really, it's across the board.
Yeah.
Everybody needs to be protecting personal data because it's being stolen for a reason. There's a monetary value to it. People aren't stealing it for fun, and it's being sold in many different areas. This is why not only are people getting hacked, but also that's why when you're having your tea, you're getting these PPI calls at night. You didn't sign up for them. Somebody's selling your information on.
Right. Our next few questions are largely about this webinar itself. So Tim, Aaron, and everyone else who's asked, we will be supplying the slides we've shown you today. So that list of 10 key talking points, you'll receive that as a PDF towards the end. But on to our next actual question about GDPR. This is from Vincent, and he's really has made a few statements and has got a question about updating contracts. So I think it was you, Jess, that mentioned that you've actually you've had to re-establish some of your contracts with your customers.
I think it was Dan.
Oh, it's
but
Dan.
We every time we renew a contract, we are rewriting that contract and making sure it's GDPR compliant. And again, it's that transparency.
So another question from Kath. Based on transparency, does an MSP have to inform their clients of the actual name of any third-party suppliers that they use to deliver a service? And this is particularly relevant to Datto because a lot of MSPs we work with will take our technology and pass it on to their customer without telling them that it's Datto, it's just the MSP. So, I mean, Dan, how have you handled that? Do you typically tell your customers what third-party suppliers you're using? If you don't, will that change with GDPR?
Yeah, in most cases, we don't actually rebrand any of the services that we sell. So, we sell Datto as managed backup by Datto. We sell managed anti-spam as Mimecast. So it's not something we would hide away and rebrand as a Myris product. So just because we want to work on the basis that we work with best-in-breed providers rather than we've cobbled something together ourselves. So we don't badge it as anything other than the service provider in probably 99% of cases.
But I'd expect that there probably is not going to be a requirement for MSPs to disclose this because it's not really dealing with personal identifiable information and so on. But I think really it's going to be case-by-case basis.
Well, actually, on the privacy notices, when you sign your customers up, it is best practice to tell them who you'll share that information with as a sub-processor. So, for instance, on my privacy notice, I work with a CRM system called Zoho, which is hosted in the cloud, and I put my customers' details on there. They've got a very good privacy notice and compliance statement. I'm happy with that, and I make that available. I also use Microsoft Office 365, and of course they're a processor, and I put that into my privacy statement as well, just so that it's very clear and transparent. This is what I'm doing with your data. To be able to do my job properly, I'm using some other providers. Here's who they are, and here's their statements of compliance. So that's what the transparency is all about.
And this is exactly why we have somebody who actually knows what they're doing on this panel rather than just me as a server geek. Another question from Katie about ransomware. And so she's mentioned that I've heard ransomware incidents are predicted to increase after GDPR. This is something I've also seen reported around in that criminals who have been able to get a malicious payload onto their victims' computers haven't triggered it there and then. They've let it lie in wait for after the GDPR has come into play so that then they can demand a much larger ransom because the levies and fines after GDPR are significantly larger. So, Katie, this is definitely I've seen and heard. Whether this is actually going to be a real thing, I'm not certain. Maybe this is perhaps an example of the millennium bug. Everyone's saying, oh, this is going to be a big thing, when in fact it may not be. But this is definitely something that has been identified by security services and security vendors saying that they have seen ransomware payloads on victims' computers that haven't actually triggered encryption yet, so lying in wait almost. So that is definitely fact. Any of my other panelists have got any insight into that? No, we've seen it as a thing.
No, I'll take a go. Yes, potentially. I mean, these the hackers, the bad guys, whatever you want to call them, they always think up ingenious ways of trying to make money without doing much work.
Yeah.
So it's quite possible that this might happen. What I will say, though, is the Information Commissioner's Office, which is the supervisory authority in the UK, they want to work with organisations. Fines will be a last resort, no matter what vendors or other consultants are saying. It's going to be a last resort. As long as you're doing the best you can with the resources that you have, then it's very unlikely that you're going to get a serious penalty. They'll look at the steps that you and your customers have put in place to protect that personal data. And if you're moving towards compliance as quickly as you can and giving it your best shot, then you should be in a good shape.
Thank you, Jim. So a question from Karen, and this is really about, managing your business as an MSP. So she's asked, is it okay to mail shot clients with promotions as long as there's no personal reference, e.g. Dear John, and provide an unsubscribe option? Well, I guess it all depends on what data you're holding about John. If you have his name and his email address, I think those two bits of data combined probably do count as personal identifiable information. Jim, is that correct?
That is correct, but if they're a client, you've already got a contract with them.
And they would have given you permission to hold that data and to use that data.
I would assume so. I mean, after the fact, even if they're an existing client, there's things called preference sensors where you can have them choose which way they're contacted, by which means, and about what. So I want to hear about events, but I don't want newsletters. It's still a good idea to give them that option, but basically the contract, if they're under contract, that's the lawful basis for processing, and they would reasonably expect to be contacted about some of these things.
So for prospecting, I have been sending out opt-in emails, so sending out an email to our database before the 25th, just asking them to opt in to receive, and like Jim says, giving preferences to receive marketing emails about events, product launches, and just giving them those choices.
Yeah. Thank you, Jess. So I've got a question from Colin I think it's mostly at Datto. So how do you manage the right to be forgotten with data stored in infinite cloud backups? So let me just set a bit of context there. One of the services that Datto provides is a backup solution that allows an MSP to store backups of customers' servers in our cloud with infinite retention. And so I guess the challenge for not only Datto, but any backup vendor, whether backups are being stored in the cloud or on tape drives or on other forms of storage, is how do you then purge those backups of data records to comply with a right to be forgotten request? And I don't think the industry has any clear answers for how to do this yet, and whether we even need to do this in the event of it actually being levied. So I'm going to ask Jim a question about this in just a moment, but from what we've seen as a vendor is that, the right to be forgotten, the actual legislation in GDPR doesn't specify much around the context for that. And I've seen some interpretations along the round that as long as it's removed from the live production system, backups that aren't actually accessible in real time may not count, but it seems a bit of a grey area. Any clarity on that, Jim?
It is a grey area, and there's many different opinions and arguments. I like to take the common sense route. And that is, if you can easily access that backup and you can withdraw or delete the information of an individual because there is some form of indexing, etc., if you can easily do that and you have the ability to get in there and find them, then do it. No problems. If you can't do it, so for instance, if it's tape backup and it doesn't have any way of easily indexing and finding an individual and deleting them without deleting other data, then you're causing a breach if you delete somebody else's data. So it then becomes technically infeasible or impossible to do. So I would say that would be out of scope. However, what I would do is remove them from the live systems and make a note that if you do restore from backup, check the list of people who have made the right to be forgotten and make sure if you have a backup put into a live system, just double check and do that again.
And that you purge any records that need to be gone from the backup.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So for us as a vendor, we're still in the process of looking at how we can best implement this within our product. And we've actually got a concept that we're currently working on called masking, which is quite similar to what Jim has just mentioned, so that if you do restore a server from backup, we can apply a mask to that to say, here's what needs to be removed from that particular server. The challenge we have is that we don't have insight to our customers' data. We know that it's a server backup, but beyond that, we can't access that server. So for us, for Datto as a data processor, we do not have the ability to remove customer records, because to do that, we would need the credentials for every single one of your customer servers. We don't have those, and we will never have those. So within the infinite cloud backups, it's not possible for us to purge a record from one of those without your customer coming and logging into that server every single time we need to purge it. So technically, we're still looking at the best way to implement that. Now, unfortunately, we're out of time. We have had several other questions come through. I will address those after the webinar for those of you who have submitted a question that we haven't had time to get to. But thank you very much for joining us today. Hopefully that's given you some great food for thought and some great pointers. The full recording of this webinar will be sent out later on today, along with a PDF of the slides. And my marketing colleagues have asked me to throw up this slide to announce a few upcoming webinars that we have. Again, targeted at managed service providers, and we've got we've got some great content coming up over the next few weeks. So please join us on these dates and times to be able to learn a bit more. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much, Dan, remotely, Jess on my left, and Jim on my right. I think you've been brilliant panelists today, and I really appreciate the comments and answers that you've given us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all, and have a good afternoon.
Thank you.